Hello everyone, and welcome to our Excel VBA tutorial series. In this video, we are diving into a really useful feature in VBA, the InputBox function. It is an integral part of user interaction in VBA. It allows us to prompt the user for input, which we can then use within our programs. Whether you're looking to collect user input or simply want a more interactive approach to your data manipulation, the InputBox function is a tool you'll want to familiarize yourself with. We're going to start from the basics and gradually progress to a full-fledged InputBox example, complete with all possible parameters. We'll discuss string-to-number conversion, handling cancel or empty input scenarios, positioning the input box, and even linking to a help file. By the end of this tutorial, you'll have a deep understanding of the InputBox function and its practical applications in Excel VBA. So let's get started. Now we are looking at Sheet 2 where we have already set up a few things. We have first name in cell A1 and surname in cell B1. Additionally, there are two buttons that we have prepared for our exercise today. The first button, labeled Enter Your First Name, is linked to our first subroutine showcasing the basic use of the input box. And the second button, labeled Enter Your Surname, is linked to the third subroutine featuring a complete example. Let's first focus on our basic example. Alright, let's take a closer look at this straightforward code. Here, in this subroutine, we have just one single line of code, but this line carries out multiple tasks. The function InputBox takes two arguments in this context. The first argument is the prompt, which is the message that appears in the dialog box asking the user to enter their name. Here we have set it as Please enter your name. The second argument is optional and represents the title of the dialog box. We have set this to username. The title is displayed in the title bar of the dialog box. If this argument is left blank or omitted, the dialog box will automatically display the name of the application, in this case, Microsoft Excel, as the default title in the title bar. Now let's talk about what happens after the user interacts with the input box. Once the input box pops up, it waits for the user to enter their name and click OK or press the Enter key. The name input by the user is returned as a string by the InputBox function. This string is then assigned to cell A2 in Sheet 2 thanks to this part of the code. Let's go back to Sheet 2 and run this code by clicking on the Enter Your First Name button to see all this in action. As you see, we have the input box popping up asking for our name. I'm going to type in a name and click OK. Perfect. The name I entered is now displayed in cell A2. This is a basic yet powerful way to get data input from users in VBA. Now that we've understood the basic use of the InputBox function, let's add a level of complexity. Our next code example in Module 2 illustrates how to handle a situation where a user either clicks Cancel or doesn't enter any data in the input box. Let's break this code down. In the first line of this subroutine, we declare a variable username of type string. This variable is where we'll temporarily store the user's input from the input box. In the next line, we use the InputBox function, just like in the previous example, asking the user to enter their name. The user's input is then stored in the username variable. But what if the user decides not to enter their name, or what if they click Cancel? The InputBox function returns an empty string in such scenarios. Our next piece of code is designed to handle these situations. We use an if statement to check if the username variable is empty. In other words, we check if username equals an empty string, represented as an empty pair of quotation marks. If it is empty, we utilize the messagebox function to display a message to the user that says, No name entered, exiting. The exit substatement then immediately terminates the subroutine. If the username variable isn't empty, which means the user has entered their name, the code execution moves past the if block to the last line of our subroutine, which then takes the value stored in username and assigns it to cell A2 on Sheet 2, just like in our previous example. Let's run this subroutine and see it in action. Excellent, our code is functioning exactly as expected. As you can see, when we ran the subroutine and didn't enter a name, a message box appeared saying, "No name entered," exiting, which was our custom message for handling empty entries. You'll notice the same message appears if we hit Cancel in the input box, demonstrating our macro's ability to handle these user interactions smoothly. Let's run the subroutine one more time, but this time we'll actually enter a name in the input box. I'll type Tom and click OK. As you can see, Tom is now displayed in cell A2 of sheet 2. That's because our code skipped the if block this time since the username variable wasn't empty and moved on to the last line, assigning Tom to cell A2. This highlights the power and flexibility of using an input box in VBA. It allows you to accept user input, but also gives you control over handling different scenarios and user behaviors. Now, let's move on to our third example to explore more advanced features of the InputBox function. Before we dive into it, let's break down all of the parameters that can be used with the InputBox function. This will give us a clearer understanding of the full range of possibilities this function has to offer. The first parameter, prompt, is the only mandatory one. This is the main text that appears in the input box, asking the user for input. The title parameter allows us to set the title of the input box. The default parameter is the text that initially appears in the text box of the input box as a suggested input. It can be left blank if no default value is to be suggested. X position and Y position are used to specify the position of the input box on the screen. X position is the distance from the left side of the screen, and Y position is the distance from the top. If these parameters are left out, Excel will automatically center the input box on screen. The last two parameters, help file and context, are primarily used for context-sensitive help. When a help file is specified, a help button appears in the dialog box. If the user clicks this button, the VBA help engine displays the topic that corresponds to the context number specified in the context parameter. However, it's essential to note that while help file and context offer the possibility of providing extra help to users using your macros, they are relatively advanced features and may not be commonly used in most typical VBA scenarios. In cases where you do not specify any help parameters but include a help file, Excel will automatically display a generic help button in the dialog box. However, clicking this button will show the default Excel help system rather than any context-sensitive help related to your macro. Now that we have a good understanding of all the parameters, let's move on to our final code example, where we'll see a complete use of the InputBox function with all of these parameters in action. Let's step through the code to understand it better. This subroutine starts off by declaring variables for all the different parameters of the InputBox function. The prompt variable is assigned the string, "Please enter your surname," which will be the prompt the user sees in the input box. The title variable is assigned the string surname, which will be the title of the input box. The default variable is set to type your surname here, which is the text that will initially appear in the text box of the input box as a suggested input. Next, the X position and Y position variables are assigned the values 9,000 and 5,000, respectively. This is going to determine the position of the input box on the screen. Next, the help file variable is assigned the location of a CHM help file that will be displayed if the user clicks on the help button in the input box. For the sake of this tutorial, I have created a sample help file and stored it at the specified location. However, creating a CHM help file and detailing its use is beyond the scope of this tutorial series. However, the file is simply there to illustrate the functionality and how it would work in a practical scenario. The context variable is assigned the number 1001, which corresponds to a specific topic in the help file. In a real-world application, you'd have multiple topics within your help file, and this parameter allows you to point to the correct topic based on the context in which the InputBox function is being used. Finally, the InputBox function is called with all these variables as parameters. The result of this function, the user's input, is assigned to cell B2 in Sheet 2. Alright, as you can see, when we run this subroutine, our fully customized input box pops up. Notice how it has incorporated all the elements we defined. The prompt is asking us to please enter your surname. The title of the box is Surname, and in the text field we can see the default text, type your surname here. The input box has also appeared at the specified position on the screen. Now pay attention to the buttons present in our input box. In addition to the default OK and Cancel buttons, we also have a Help button. This button has been enabled because we provided the help file and context parameters in our input box function. So what happens when you click on the Help button? Let's find out. When we click on Help, the .chm help file that we linked should open. Not just that, it should also take us directly to the topic with the ID we defined. This feature can be extremely handy in real-world applications where users might need some extra assistance or guidance on the kind of input required. In conclusion, by customizing the input box and implementing the Help button functionality, we have created a more user-friendly and informative interface for our application. Users can now easily enter their surname and receive helpful guidance when needed. As you continue developing your application or project, remember to thoroughly test all aspects of the program to ensure it works as intended and provides a smooth experience for the end users. Additionally, consider incorporating more features and error handling to make the application even more robust. Thank you for watching. If you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe for more tutorials. Happy coding, and I'll see you in the next video.